Welcome to PHP Podcast. I'm Mike.
And this is Orlando, and we're here for another Monday minisode.
Yeah, Monday Minis, where we get to, what do we say? It was like a Reader's Digest. It was like the appetizer. Like an appetizer.
Getting you ready for Wednesday.
For Wednesday, the real episode, the long one. So if you're following us on YouTube, and this is kind of how you watch our shows, maybe you found us here, we have a longer episode that releases on Wednesdays. It's on YouTube, but it's also podcast format. So, you can find a home in your ears, as you're driving or whatever through our podcast, any major podcasting platform. Hour plus episode where we go into a lot of depth on various things. But our Monday minis, we're going to focus in on one thing. And today we're talking about that very, 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 it's tricky, that 90-day total on eBay that can be very misleading, and why you can't always trust what people show when it comes to their 90-day total.
Or you can't even trust it for yourself.
True.
So let me explain that real quick. Did you, I don't know if you noticed, but there was a 90-day total glitch this last week.
Was there?
So I instantly lost like $7,000 on my 90-day total.
Ouch.
And usually what that means is...
You had a big sale that dropped off.
Yeah. But I didn't have like $7,000 in sales over like 2 days. You know what I mean? Like I have $1,000 days, but not $7,000. And I'm like, and it was one of those things where I kept refreshing it and it would go back up and it'd go back down, back up, back down. And here's what's crazy. If you check, I encourage you, all of you, to check. Let us know in the comments if you find this to be true. Your 90-day total on your app is not the same as a 90-day total on your desktop.
Interesting.
It's weird.
Maybe it's a different day that they start counting a different clock or something.
But why isn't that outlined?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
That's so wild.
But to clarify, though, although there are glitches and weird things like that, like what we're really talking about today is the fact that a lot of times, especially in the social media space, if you're on YouTube watching a podcast about reselling, chances are you kind of follow the reselling world. And so you're familiar with people posting like, hey, look at my 90-day total. And Orlando and I are not against that. We're not against the fact that people saying, hey, look at, I've grown. I used to make this amount. I make this amount now. And kind of just like that, wanting that reinforcement or trying to show, or to show some validity of, hey, what I'm saying and doing is real. However, a lot of times people will utilize that almost misleadingly as deception to say, look at how much money I make, therefore you should buy my course, or therefore you should, and again, nothing wrong with selling courses. However, when people show that number, there's a lot of things it's not showing, and it makes it tough because we can compare ourselves with other people and say, man, why am I not where they're at? Why don't I make that kind of money? Why maybe I'm a failure? Maybe I should quit. And social media has a habit of doing that to people. People show the best of themselves. People then tend to compare and say, hey, I'm not like that. Well, they're showing you the best possible moment in their life, and you're comparing the real world to that. And it's not always real. And so we're going to talk about some of the things that are really hidden and misleading about that 90-day total.
So the very first one right off the bat is shipping. I think that's a big one that a lot of people miss. So if you watch, let's say you watch a YouTuber, somebody that sells big bulky items or they sell electronics, chances are their 90-day total is going to be higher than somebody that sells the same amount of, let's say, clothing or shoes and so on, right? Because if I sell, let's say, a big stereo and it costs me, the stereo I sold for 100 and it cost me $100 to ship, right? That's $200 that's going to end up in that 90-day total. But let's say I sell a $200 shirt and it only costs me, let's say I send a priority, it cost me $8 to ship. Who has the greater profit margin? It's the person that sold that $200 shirt, not the person that sold a $100 stereo that it cost them $100 to ship. But on the 90-day total, they both get calculated in there.
Yeah, and that's what's tough is because it doesn't break it into categories, and it is a useful tool. Like one of the things, we're not saying that the 90-day total isn't a valuable tool. Like in your own business, if you have, you understand the types of items you're selling, you kind of have a general idea of what your cost of shipping and other things are. You can look at the 90-day total and say, okay, my business is slowly growing, or hey, I'm having a really low month. Maybe what's going on, and it can be kind of like it's like in your car, check engine light comes on. It's not telling you check engine light is on because of X, Y, and Z. It's just saying you need to figure it out. Something is wrong. And so that 90-day total can be that like, maybe there's something wrong, or maybe there's something going really good. And then you actually have to dive in, do the research, find the data, find what the data prove to see, am I making money? Am I losing money? But yeah, shipping is such an easy one that it's just not included in there. The next one is other fees, right? Like there is a cost of putting the item in your store, right? Just the listing fee. Then there's the final value fee of an item. So, and then on top of final value fee, and again, if you're selling things for a certain amount, part of that's going to be fees. So you can look at the 90-day total and assume what those fees are in general based off of that. But it's not going to tell you about promoted listings. And there's two different ways you can promote listings. You can have hey, I'm paying an extra 3%, 4% because I promoted it and it's selling. So some of that money is not actually there. Or it could be pay per click. And so you could be really, really promoting an item and getting the actual profit you made on it could be 10% less than if you didn't have promoted listing. Maybe you're selling through more of them, so it's still valuable, but that total number could be 15, 20% actually lower than it really is, not even including shipping, but just on the fees, the promoted listing fees, the listing fees, all of those things are included in there. And you don't know how much of that net is actual fees.
Yeah, it's wild because somebody,
I guess I should say gross, not net.
Well, right? You could have, gross. You could have two people with 30,000, let's say 90-day, totals, and one person is paying 15% in promoted fees and another person is paying 2%. Well, the person with the 15% is making less money, but you wouldn't know that. Right. And so this is why you got to be careful with those 90-day totals. Now, it also hides a lot of costs. And what I mean is the cost of goods primarily, right? So you could have somebody at the bins, right? And they're making, I keep throwing this number, the $30,000, right? $10,000 a month, right? So that $30,000, they're spending maybe $1,000, right? Which would be wild, but if they're going to the bins, that's very possible. They're spending $1,000 at the bins, right? Every 90 days. Or you have somebody who's having, pallets coming in and they're spending $10,000. So a third of that, right? You don't know that, right? It's very hard to know. Now, you could, if let's say they're a YouTuber and they're sharing that process with you, or they're sharing, hey, this is how I get my goods. But there's a lot of other costs that may be hidden. There's the shipping costs that are hidden. There's the cost of, maybe getting somebody to photograph items. There's a lot that is not shown. And again, you always got to be careful too with the 90-day totals, because even when, there's sometimes where people have returns, right? And so they may be giving 50% returns, or they may be giving full returns, or with shipping, they may have free returns. And there's just so many hidden things that are not there. But I would say the one that really does not show is the amount of labor.
Yeah, labor is a big part because, again, you can be somebody with a $5,000 90-day total, but maybe you work an hour every couple of weeks. You're into a niche where you really understand. You're like, hey, I found this really old clock. It's a vintage clock. This is my market. I know this. I drove an hour to go pick it up. It took me 20 minutes to list it, and I sold it for $5,000. And I sell one of those every few months. And that's all I do. I got a $5,000 total. Somebody else could have a $5,000 90-day total, and they're working 8 hours a day.
16, 18, 20 hours.
Yeah.
Who knows?
So it's really tough because you're not getting a clear indication, because then what would be maybe a better way of saying is what's my cost per hour, or what's my profit per hour.
Mm-hmm.
And unless somebody's willing to do the whole breakdown, the hard part with social media is people want instant things. They want to be able to have a headline. You want to be able to say look at how much I made, look at how much I sold this thing for. But again, it doesn't count all those things. And you might have to actually write an article explaining how I sourced this item, how much time it took to source the item, what shipping was like, how much time did I spend shipping, what all of those things are factored into it, the labor process of it. And you're really not getting the best picture. You're getting that quick headline. Look, I made X amount of money. And like I said, I have a friend who's into a niche, and he barely works at all, and he's making more money than I do. And he really knows this category. And so his 90-day total is usually above mine. But even when there's times when it's hey, how you doing? And he's like, oh, my 90-day total is X. I know for a fact he worked a lot less for that 90-day total than I did. So even if I've got an extra $1,000, $2,000 in my 90-day total, I know he's the better reseller, in the sense of he did a better, he got the better end of the deal. So the labor aspect is a big portion of it. And you got to count that into what you're doing. I mean, working for $10 an hour in today's day and age is just not worth it. It's not worth it.
Yeah, and that's why I'm a big believer. When people are saying that they're working 80-hour weeks, I'm like, whew.
You better be pulling in some really good money.
Yes. Because to me, it's, I understand not working for the man, not being the 9 to 5. But if you're working 80 hours not to do that, I don't know.
Yeah, you better be setting yourself
It's a tough one.
You better be setting yourself up to be able to like be multi-millionaire real quick. To be putting in that amount of time. 100%.
And the other one is circumstances may be different, right? There's a lot of behind the scenes that you don't know in social media, right? So, I spend a ton of time with my kids, right? The only moments you see on Instagram or on the YouTube is when I'm out sourcing, when I'm out making a sale. But, there's some days where I may only work 3 hours that day. There's some days I may not work. There's some days where I may work 18 hours, right? But you don't know. And everybody's circumstance is different. So, you might have this 20-something-year-old guy, no kids, not married, and he's pulling in $100K every 90 days. Yes, that's because he's not married. He doesn't have kids. He might be even living at home, and he doesn't even have to worry about making his own meals, doing his own laundry. All he has to do is reselling. Yeah. And so that 90-day total doesn't tell the whole story.
Well, yeah. And the other thing too is the idea is like more money equals more success. And that's not always the case. For instance, your 90-day total, I mean, we don't really share our totals with each other, but your 90-day total, I'm sure, is significantly higher than mine. But this is your full-time job. For me, if I've got a $5,000 90-day total, and I know of that, like maybe 1,500 of it, 2,000 of it might be fees, cost of goods, the storage, the amount of time it took. So maybe it's only $3,000 net that I'm pulling out of this. Well, for 90 days, that means $1,000 a month. And as a part-time reseller who's really not putting in, excessive amounts of time in it, hey, that's the $1,000 I need in order to keep my wife home and for order for us to do the things we want to do. So for me, that's success. So a $5,000 total, that might be the number I need to be super successful, where somebody else might need a $20,000 number. And so just to say like, hey, this person has 20, they're more successful. That's not always the case because again, circumstances are different. What does it take to get to that number? Now, if a person is working the same amount that I'm working and they're making that kind of money, okay, I would say they're being more successful than me, right? But if a person is working full time and they're making significantly more than me, we just have different goals.
Yeah.
And so I might be more willing to follow somebody with a $5,000 a day, 90-day total if their like lifestyle matches up with mine. Hey, how did you get there? What are the things you have to do to get to that point? As opposed to following the person who's got the $20,000, $40,000 90-day total when it's like, hey, I'm not really wanting a warehouse and I'm not wanting to go full time at this point. So I'm not going to look at you as the model of success that I'm after.
Yeah, agreed. And so be careful with those 90-day totals because there's a lot of info that's not on there. You don't know what the labor was involved in that 90-day total. And overall, everybody's circumstances is different. So you got to find a circumstance that works for you. On a personal level, for me, I know what I need to make to pay the bills, right? So that 90-day total, I'll look at it. It's kind of nice when it goes up and it really begins to build. But at the same time, I actually care more about, hey, what is my overall net? Are all my bills being paid? Do I have capital to buy more goods? And also, do I have capital to invest and so on? So things you need to think about. Don't rely on that 90-day total and don't let that 90-day total overwhelm you or discourage you when you see others are doing better because not everybody has the same story. With that being said, make sure to be real,
be relevant,
and be reselling. Peace.